The global system has changed significantly and rapidly, these changes being most notable in human transformation over the last centuries. Despite these changes, the issue of power has remained central in human interactions, with traditional elements of power performing poorly in the modern globalized stage. Greater attention to soft power is a reflection of how the environment surrounding international relations has dramatically changed over the recent past. The world is gradually becoming less welcoming to Hobbesian brutes, and more to those sensitized to soft opportunities and the challenges presented by the global environment. The traditional vision of power assumes a more realist perspective, primarily presented as hard power that is oriented towards material resources to influence others. John Miyashima and Kenneth Walt are some of the most notable realist proponents. Miyashima popularly said, quote, "Power is based on the particular material capabilities that a state possesses. These material capabilities are essentially tangible assets that determine a nation's military strength." Similarly, Walt defines power in terms of a country's capabilities, that is population and territorial size, resource endowment, economic muscle, military strength, political stability, and overall competence. A nation's influence is based on its industrial military complex that could effectively threaten or marshal force. Emphasis falls on tangible resources that determine nations' capacities to employ force in pursuing its goals. The reliance of hard power on tangible resources arise from the pure realist anarchy interpretations derived from how Hobbes accounts for the system of nature. The realist components of nations' behaviors based on anarchy conditions, commonly defined as power that keeps actors in awe, guides the optimization of tangible resources that guarantee offensive and defensive protection. The perceptions of power are reduced to the vulnerability of the actor, and that influences how they behave. Tangible resources, both symbolic and manifest, could be employed to both repel force and compel actors into submission, outcomes that could be exactly achieved by goodwill, or soft resources that tend to be useless when managing a confrontation. In the case of realists, military units control tangible resources that ensure nations and actors against disastrous situations. The reliance on soft power could reduce the probability of a military attack compared to a purely militarized strategy. The traditionalist military-reliant form of power was widened by Nye to include intangible resources that could be used to achieve power or exert influence without all the unnecessary controversy. The exclusive use of military resources to define power has constantly limited the understanding of power for centuries. Soft power focuses on a positive image on the world stage to endear nations to others. A positive image could be derived from a number of sources, including domestic and foreign policies, a nation's actions, and a nation's qualities independent of their actions or policies, such as their culture. The positive image draws admiration that endears a nation to others, with this endearment being so strong to the point of one nation wanting to emulate another in terms of policies and actions. Endearment enhances influence to the point that a nation could defer to others' wishes on international issues. Emulation creates a network of nations guided by similar actions, policies, and goals, in a manner consistent with the main nation. Soft power defines the context through which nations decide what interests to pursue. Hard power extracts compliance by relying on tangible resources that are the foundation of direct and coercive resources. Soft power is realized through actions, qualities, and policies that endear nations to others. The differentiation between hard and soft power explains why hard power is more likely to draw conflicts of interests compared to soft power. Soft power is sometimes referred to as meta power, which is used to describe situations in which power relations are included in greater social relations that influence outcomes from actor interactions. Meta power encompasses shaping situations, social structures, and social relationships by altering possibilities and actions through which they occur. Social relations significantly determine the structures surrounding bargaining boundaries. Looking at the equilibrium in any bargaining space says very little about the balance of power. For instance, losing a struggle for immediate power could still be winning if social relations could skew the bargaining space appropriately. Essentially losing the battle but winning the war. Metapower is often discussed in the context of agenda control, where formal agendas guide bargaining processes and outcomes follow a wide range of issues as well as strategic possibilities. The agenda defines issues to be raised and subsequently sets bargaining boundaries. Agenda control is often developed within issue contexts such as majority rule cycles, political decision-making structures, log rolling, bureau sponsor situations, budgetary politics, and constitutional design. The adversarial relationship between actors is not affected by agenda control, which implies that conflicts of interests between actors persist. With regard to the agenda, there are definitely winners and losers. The elements of soft power associated with agenda control include support for institutions and the control for rules. Actors who can mold preferences and interests of others to match theirs can acquire three-dimensional power, structural power, and coercion postulate. Meta-power exudes way more conflicts of interests compared to soft power because of the legitimization of capitalism ideology. Coercion imposes ideas that are against the objectives of a group. Neo-Marxists who study international relations argue that dominant nations produce historical blocks when dominating others, with this domination being exerted through institutions that present themselves as guarantors of collective interests in the global stage while they only seek to protect their interests. These are the common sources of soft power, both domestically and internationally. Respect is quite a popular strategy when seeking to internationally attain soft power, especially respect for international treaties, laws, norms, and institutions. Domestically attained soft power is largely drawn from culture and political institutions. The relationship between hard and soft power goes beyond the mean of attaining power or exerting influence, that is using tangible and intangible resources respectively. The two are neither rigid components nor perfect substitutes, but they reinforce each other in smart power. A strong positive image draws more international support which improves a nation's defenses, at least on the international front. Committing troops to defend a nation has more support as a defense state. America's post-war economic primacy is founded on the Pax Americana, which is the primacy that was attained by the American military. Hard power makes a nation a role model for others, especially powerful military arsenals and successful strategies that enhances respect and admiration. Military resources should not be used in ways that undermine the attainment of soft power. For example, military power could be used to pursue collective goals such as terrorism and the war on drugs. While hard and soft power could complement each other, they could also destroy each other. Particularly, hard power significantly challenges the establishment of a positive image because of threats, sanctions, and imperialism. Actions oriented towards the attainment of soft power could be costly by sacrificing hard power. American unilateralists express these soft power-related concerns owing to limitations arising from international sanctions. For instance, global warming agreements limit America's economic growth, law of the sea limits access to valuable resources, and America submitting herself to the ICC could limit the effectiveness of its military operations abroad. Separation of hard and soft power could be imperfect and arbitrary. For instance, international aid enhances a nation's image, but could provide the required liquidity to purchase exports provided by the donor or to pay back debts provided by the donor. Military force could generate a positive image for supporting nations, such as liberating Kuwait or protecting Saudi Arabia. However, tangible resources could reduce a country's efficiency of attaining hard power. For instance, military atrocities give rise to rebellions that could weaken the aggressor to a certain degree. Moreover, issuing threats that never materialize could reduce the power attained by the threatening nation. Soft power resources could also taint the image of a nation. Think of the perceptions of China's debt to Africa to support infrastructure development. Think of the perceptions of IMF debts and how they are used to influence the internal operations of African nations. While many embrace Western culture because of the related institutions, others perceive it as imperialism and contamination. The use of tangible resources could optimize the need for intangible resources, with the vice versa also being true. For instance, attractiveness based on loyalty is founded on the effective deployment of military resources. Accepting restraint on one's actions through the ratification of treaties may not necessarily affect hard power positions. A reduction of hard power could be compensated by a soft power effect. The distinctions between hard and soft power are not necessarily based on the tangibility of resources. For instance, military forces drawing admiration is an example of wanting to be associated with a winner. International soft power components such as foreign policies are heavily reliant on strong military resources. Hard power easily draws admiration if it is used for good, such as supporting peacekeeping missions, fighting against genocide, and providing economic aid. Neoliberalism and constructivism have sought to challenge realism by introducing alternative power orientations that focus more on soft as opposed to hard power. The alternatives have been nurtured historically through the transformation of international politics. Various political transformations have raised the importance of soft over hard power. For instance, economic, social, and political interdependence, that have been enhanced through globalization and modernization, has reduced the utility of hard power. Coercion, threats, and punishment attract all sorts of considerable costs in a connected world, including self-punishment, especially by assassinating one's character in the global stage. The strategies to optimizing a nation's wealth have shifted from coercion to cooperation. The need to attain desirable outcomes from a group of people overrides the need to limit the fallout arising from coercion. Transnational actors and leaders avoid coercion by reigning freely and taking refuge in available international havens. Economic feudalism arising from interdependence has shifted power from states to transnational networks. The growth of international stakes for transnational actors has incentivized the expansion of political capital to reinforce ties with other actors. Access to foreign citizens and governments has compounded the effects of democratization by reducing the likelihood of political conflicts. The threat of deploying nuclear weapons among countries with such military capabilities has dramatically increased over the recent past. The nuclear revolution has been central to the creation of a new security community that raises the stakes of potential war in terms of cost. The utility arising from soft power, that is cooperation, collaboration, admiration, and respect, has increased compared to that of using tangible resources that influence coercion. The growth of democracy has worsened the disutility of coercion as actors bear greater costs of using coercion to achieve power. Political empowerment generates strong impediments to using force and coercion. Democracy drives leaders towards liberal principles that manifest as soft power. Outcomes are achieved through consistent policies associated with liberal democratic legitimacy. Social and political changes have increased people's sensitivity towards their economic fates compared to their warrior ethics. The prosperity society has increased the need for economic interdependence, thereby reducing the need for hard power. Democracy and welfare orientation have informed the adoption of foreign adventurism as a weapon of political survival. Post-war international organizations and regimes have emphasized cooperation. Unilateral actions that disregard international organizations are increasingly becoming costlier. The organizations have set international civil behavior standards, with expectations gravitating towards the sanctity of related institutions. Theories of power should be questioned constantly, and power audits should account for the sensitivity arising from the different phases of power in world politics. Assessing and reassessing nations' sources of power to enhance those that perform well and reconfigure or eliminate those that perform poorly are fundamental for countries' competitive advantage. Changes in world politics should be monitored as they bring forth new sources of power. Continuous auditing facilitates the assessment of new sources of power that should remain viable options for leaders interested in enhancing their nation's influence. Constantly assessing power challenges human psychological tendencies owing to existing cognitive limitations. People are often cognitively rigid or think paradigmatically, with the theories and paradigms being used to understand the world remaining fairly consistent or stable. While constantly evolving power calls for assessment and auditing, leaders will be required to be highly perspicacious, proactive, and vigilant. Leaders should assess the intended and unintended consequences of the different strategies used to gain, exert, or maintain power. The complexity of international politics calls for careful examination of a nation's actions. Complex international systems imply that relations cannot be simple. Subsequently, power is neither accumulated in a vacuum or exercised. As such, power-seeking strategies or behaviors attract a wide range of consequences, with some creating self-defeating or counterproductive outcomes. Most of the benefits associated with soft power are indirect and long-term, which constitute the aforementioned complexity. Decision-makers always rely on bounded rationality owing to individuals' paradigmatic thinking. Bounded rationality is often based on limited information, thereby producing shallow decision-making models. Lack of proper consequence assessment could result in neglecting the importance or positives associated with soft power. Complexity requires the examination of net effects, which are the outcomes left once the uses of power are done. Evaluating power in nominal terms often contributes to victimization. Decision-makers seeking to accumulate power resources should be very keen when it comes to cost assessment and related consequences, especially through feedback that is important for complex systems. Nominalism tendencies when assessing national issues create bias in hard and soft power limitations. Judging power should be based on outcomes rather than resources. Decision-makers are tolerant of failures if it means attaining vital objectives. This phenomenon is based on the blinding effects of resource moral hazards because nations with significant tangible resources might not generate the desired outcomes when it comes to attaining power. Hard power resources are easily quantified using soft power sources. It is easier to agree on a country's military might compared to a nation's influence relative to their effectiveness in international relations. Outcome interpretation presents a series of difficulties, especially through the constant reference to existing international relations theories. Distorted outcome perceptions due to cognitive rigidity limit the formulation of policies that promote a nation's influence. This phenomenon results in valuing hard power more than soft power, based on limitations arising from personal biases.